Hi everyone, welcome. Thanks for joining us for the second conversation in the series of Arts and Place Now. I'm Kate Watson from Beam, and we're a founding member of the Arts and Place Consortium. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the members involved in helping to curate this series, the Art Fund for their support, and of course a big thanks to all our speakers and artists as well. Each talk has been streamed live on YouTube, so if you've got any questions or comments, please use the live chat section on YouTube, and we'll try and pick some of those up towards the end of each conversation. And of course, if you want to carry on the conversation afterwards, you can follow us on Twitter using #ArtsAndPlaceNow. So now I'm really pleased to hand over to Sebastian Hicks and Cara Pickering. So let's see if we can get them on screen. Here we go. Hi, Cara. Hi, Sebastian.
Hi, Kate.
Hi. Hello.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. So I'm going to remove myself now and I will hand over to you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our conversation. My name's Cara Pickering and I am the project manager for Coventry Modern, which is a series of events taking place across Coventry, focusing on the architectural post-war landscape. Within my work, I am very delighted to be able to present this conversation with Sebastian Hicks on his project, which took place last year in the ruins of Coventry Cathedral. To give you a bit of insight, the ruins of Coventry Cathedral play host to a series of events throughout each year, focusing on bringing people together through music, art, poetry, dance. There's a really, really wide mixed range of events that I've also been fortunate to work on. So whilst I am pleased to tell you all about that, let's hear from Sebastian. Hi, Sebastian.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
No worries at all. Just to start us off, could you tell us a bit about you and your work and the project that we're going to talk about?
Yes, well, I'm an architect and I'm working currently at Coventry University. So I'm leading the Master of Architecture at Coventry. And I have quite a lot of experience prior to coming to Coventry with different projects, a couple of which I'll kind of introduce at the beginning today before we get onto the main theme, which was this installation at the cathedral ruins called the Chapel of Many. And yeah, I'll kind of try and frame the project in some ideas that I've been thinking about and the importance of public space at the moment. I think it's really important at the moment thinking about spaces and public space. I mean, definitely, currently new forms of space are being invented as we speak. There are bubbles and there are a kind of shared kind of communities and expanded spaces. Every day it seems like a new kind of space is being developed, but also we have some very kind of active reclamation of public monuments, and so this is really interesting time to be talking about monuments in public space. And the project we're going to be talking about is essentially something that was put into a space for the public to enjoy.
And in the ruins of the cathedral, which stands next to the new cathedral, so monument away. Obviously yours was called the Chapel of Many, which fits really nicely in with the location of the cathedral and its religious connotations. But how did you go from the artwork that you create to building a chapel?
Well, maybe along the process, if we start the process and look at some slides, I'll be able to maybe take you through the process, because it's been quite a long process of development. So this is the project that we're going to be talking about now, which is the chapel. And basically it's a very simple structure. So it's a circle, and each of those kind of pieces or elements you see within the circle are chairs. So they fold away, or you can take them down and they become chairs, so they're folding chairs. And the main narrative within this space was an idea of kind of transparency, engagement, and public space that people can take control of. And as more people come to the space, so walls come down. But I'd like to just to start the project a little bit in a different space, and I would like to start thinking about creation of projects. And this is Alecha's kitchen. So this is starting in a completely different place, but Alecha's kitchen was the kind of inspiration behind a project that I did in Argentina. And I'll go through this fairly quickly, but as you can see, Alecha's kitchen is basically a food storage with a roof that kind of comes off around the main kind of body of the building. A very simple kind of improvised growing building, something that lots of people have probably had their hand in. This is in Argentina in making, so it's about a co-creation of space with the things that are found in the area. And this became the kind of inspiration behind a project which has those concepts of co-creation behind them. And as you can see, this is almost inspired by Alecha's kitchen. This is a project that basically has a series of boxes and an extending roof, which then can be adapted and developed. So I'm showing this just because I want to show how important it is that the physical experience of making, but also the idea of co-creation, is to me in the artistic practice. This is me marking out the foundations. This is a project I did with a very good friend of mine, Stefan Breuer, from Austria. And this is marking out the foundations on the ground with ash from the fire. So these elemental building materials are always really important. These are bricks made from the earth, obviously, and the workers helping making the bricks. And these are timbers or wooden tree stumps or tree trunks that have been eaten out by parasites. So, and these were used as the window frames, if you saw the window frames in earlier images. So it's the idea of co-creation of the object by the place, by nature, and by the circumstances around it. And these are the workers that had their hand in developing that project, and which grew as we went along. And this is Alecha, whose kitchen was the inspiration behind it. So no matter how designed an object is, or how far you have control over the digital model or the design, all of these things, the nature, the circumstance, the environment, they should all play into the design of a project.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that you had a series of workers with you on this project. Are they local people?
They were local people in the region, yes. And there was a very beautiful skills exchange, which also came when we move on to the chapel, which is also something that came forth on the chapel. So also intergenerational understanding and learning was a key part to that. So that whole process of making is really important. Brilliant.
So the chapel then, was this an extension of the work that you did here with the kitchen? Was it part of the series?
If we go on to, there's just a little section now of I'll show you some ideas how the idea of the chair was born and how we got onto the idea of the chair being a fundamental part of the production of the potential production of public space.
That sounds great.
And I whizzed a little bit through that first introduction, but I wanted to kind of introduce the idea of making and process, and the idea of place as a co-creator, or as a major part of the narrative. Another departure, what we're going to look at here, this is Chandigarh. So I don't know how many people know Chandigarh, but what you're looking at here is basically a city design in northern India by Le Corbusier and Pierre Jeanneret, and this was in 1951. So what we have is an imprint, and this is quite interesting in terms of thinking about modernism and Coventry as a modern city. What we have is a city designed from scratch at the time of the partition of India and Pakistan and the creation of Pakistan, and Punjab needed a new center. So what you have is a design of a city from the drawing board laid onto a piece of ground. And what is interesting here is when we start talking about public space, I like to think about the body and the body in space. And what we have is a kind of a city that is designed with modernist principles and is actually based around the idea of a body. So at the top, you have the head, which is the assembly, which is where all the decisions are made. So you could say the parliament. In the middle, which is the kind of orange area there, you have the stomach, which is the shopping, but also the industrial area. And then you have the veins of the transportation, so ease of transportation. If we think about Coventry, we have the ring road, but this is kind of allowing the city to move freely. And then we also have the green lungs. So the idea was that this space is like a body. And this is important to me because I'm interested, and as you look at the chapel, the interaction of the body and space is quite interesting. So this is maybe what this is a street view that's taken. So you've got this idea of zoning, you've got housing in one area, you have wide boulevards for ease of transportation, and you've got a very clear division of movement and non-movement. And this is an image that I show, I like to show a lot. It was really important to me as I was a student. And this is the image of the same city, so Chandigarh, which has the kind of the lines which you see there are streets, and then you see the head at the top, which is called the capital, and then you see the kind of parks that kind of run through it in an organic way. But then you have also these dark blotches, and those dark blotches are kind of interesting because they are mappings of labor workers' colonies. And workers' colonies were the workers who built the city. Obviously, they were quite poor. They built the city, they built the roads, and they ended up, they would live on site and work. But once the city was finished, they would still be there. I mean, but they wouldn't have enough money to buy into these new complexes. So they would have informal settlements, and those are these blotches. These are informal settlements. What is interesting about that is that the informal settlements, as seen on a body, which the city was a body, almost become growths that are not wanted. So they get actually cut out and pushed to the edge. So this is really important for me, because it shows in the same image an idea of planning, which is kind of a plan made from the top down, but also the idea of mapping, which is looking at what is there and mapping those labor's colonies and giving them the same presence within the image as the map. And I'll just quickly go on to what happened to these labor colonies. So they got pushed to the edge, and they got given a piece of land which was about 20 square meters. And that's really difficult to understand what that is if you don't have anything to compare it with, a scale. So if you put a bed on it, you put a bed and you can see how big it is. If you put 5 beds on the site, which was the average size of their families, you're filling half the site. So these are tiny, tiny spaces that they got given. And this was the first part of the process of thinking about space in terms of beds. This was the idea that I was thinking about, was that the charpoy, the Indian bed, which is what I was placing on the site. These are photos from somebody who was very important in my education, which is Dr. Carl Voot, and he also took the photo on the right, which shows a dovecote. But what is beautiful about that, it shows these precarious structures that are inhabited, and the precarity of people and the precarity of life I see as reflected in these structures that were actually for doves or pigeons. So when we were asked to do a design for a reconstruction in Bhuj, in Chandigarh, also in Western India, I looked at the minimum plot size they were offering, and it was 200 square meters. And this was an exclusive idea of design. So not everybody can afford to have 200 square meters. So in a kind of a way, I was trying to make a critical design process. So I was trying to say, okay, what if we use the minimum plot size as the size of a bed, so that everybody can have access to buying or owning land? And this is really important for me, this idea of non-discriminatory planning or non-discriminatory public space, but also non-discriminatory possibility for ownership. And then, so this was a polemic project, trying to be a bit provocative. Then I would say, okay, so if two people got together, they would have the high double. They would be able to sleep on top at night and have some shade during the day. So this bed became the generator of a series of structures that became the city, which was really a kind of just a provocation to the planners who were working with the sites and actually just dealing with huge plots, trying to create detached middle-class houses. I even went so far as to say, okay, what if lots of people came together and they would give themselves identity by having these high rises? So you'd have high rises of the beds, the charpoi. So the bed starts to become a city. And if you bear with me a little bit, Cara,
no, I'm
we
with
will
you.
get to chairs in the end. We will get to chairs in the end. I'm sorry about that. So what is really interesting about this process is that it started off with beds, and it started off with this reflection on the modern city and the response in a physical, bodily way to the idea of the plan, the top-down plan. If you go to a really interesting podcast, I've put it down there on the right, there's a Nice Try podcast, and in that podcast, you have a really nice discussion about the furniture of Chandigarh. And whilst the architecture of Chandigarh was very much Western inspired, and as you saw in the picture, was white, wasn't showing any of the richness of the detail of Indian culture that had preceded this idea of kind of a modernist city. What you have is a kind of a clean blanket breakaway from that, and the possibility of local craftsmen to express their craft within that framework was very much they didn't have much space to do that. But if you build a new city, you also have to build a hell of a lot of furniture to fill that city. And this is the Pierre Jeanneret chair who designed the city with Corbusier. But actually the chair and the furniture for Chandigarh was much more using local materials. And then you had lots of local craftsmen making lots of different typologies of chair and in interpreting the chair and interpreting those modern designs and finding their expression within the furniture of the city. So where they couldn't find their expression within that modern city, which was almost an act of kind of neoclassic neocolonialism, where lots of people kind of saw it as, what you had was this localized expression through the chair. So it almost became an act, a defiant act of expression within the modernist genre framework. And those chairs, the Pierre Jeanneret chair now, if you want to buy one, it's about 4,000 euros. But even the more modest chairs and the interpreted chairs and the different chairs are being collected now and being restored. So these chairs became an act of local expression and local defiance, I would say.
They're really
beautiful. Have that potential. Pardon?
They're really beautiful.
Yeah, so they are. They're very beautiful. You can see they're improvised, and you can see that they've had to build a kind of a lot of them. So the details are pragmatic, you know. There are joints on them, so they've got the finger joints around the top of the edge there, which is the same as we have with our chairs. But so the bed turned into a chair, and that's the first time where I thought about the chair as being having the potential to create something with meaning within public space.
Sure. I don't know if you've actually taken a look at the chairs inside the new cathedral that are still there from the original consecration. But the way that they're built and stack and move I know for a fact for the event staff working there, they've become a kind of an iconic piece in their own right as well. Something about chairs that makes people feel a certain way.
It's really important. When I first had this idea of creating, the chair pavilion for Coventry, I went, I knew of those chairs, and I'd done a little bit of research, but then I hadn't really clocked them as I'd been through the cathedral. But the next time I went in, I was just, wow, the amount of them and the beauty of them. And I was just struck, and I was a little bit worried as well, because obviously I was working within a certain budget and a certain time frame, and I was kind of, oh, I'd love to be able to achieve the craftsmanship of those chairs to make this really precious object. We got part of the way there, I would say, but but it's true that the chair is really important, and it is an iconic piece in Coventry.
Brilliant. So do you think that the shape of the chair influenced the structure? I guess that's what you're talking about now.
Yeah, so this is where we take a step towards the idea of the chair within the structure. But also, this is the first incarnation of the design as we saw it then coming into Coventry Cathedral. And this one was actually designed for an Eisteddfod. So it was a design for a competition. So an Eisteddfod competition. I'm half Welsh. So I felt that allowed me to participate, but it didn't win, which was, I thought it was a shame, because it's really interesting, because Eistedd means to sit in Welsh. So to sit in place, Eisteddfod, and also the bard or the winning poet gets given a chair at the Eisteddfod. So chairs play a really important role in the Eisteddfod, and I got no feedback, so I don't know why we didn't win. But this was the first incarnation where the beds, the structures of the beds turned to chairs, and this idea of more light coming in. So these are kind of CGIs for that competition. But then we come to Coventry. Finally, we come to Coventry. So by way of Argentina and India, but we come to Coventry in the end. And what you see here is a plan of the cathedral, beautifully drawn. Sir Basil Spence plan of Coventry Cathedral. This is the competition entry, I believe. So it doesn't really have the steps that you know. But what you see here on the right, obviously you have or on the west, you could say, you have the
new cathedral,
the old cathedral, on the right, yes, and then on the left you have the ruins of the old cathedral. But what you have are the two chapels. What really stand out for me in this drawing are these two circular chapels, the Chapel of Unity and the Chapel of Industry, and how kind of they're plugged into the space, but aren't within the cathedral itself. And this gave us something really, as we kind of thought about the idea of building this pavilion within Coventry. I think this was one of the starting points. We had been running with a good friend of mine and fellow colleague, Russell Stevens. We'd been running, for students, we'd been running projects within the cathedral ruins of peace pavilions. So, and I had always shown the students the Eisteddfod entry as part of that. And then I started to gradually think, okay, this could be a project for Coventry. So it became, the idea became the third chapel. So you've got the Chapel of Industry, the Chapel of Unity. And the idea was that you would create the third chapel. So we started with students, started prototyping and building models. So this is a very, the models, trying to get the proportions right, trying to understand how you create that openness when you take things away. Because in the original design, the openings within the framework, the superstructure, were just one chair wide. So when you took a chair down, you would have quite a narrow gap to walk through. But now, one of the students came up with this idea, was that if you had chairs kind of hanging off either side of the columns, that you would actually create a gap that was 2 chairs wide. So this was quite important, and it's kind of solved the problem. Even though it's a very simple problem, kind of idea, it solved the problem. So these are models and drawings of the...
I was just going to say, how many students did you have working on the design process with you?
It ended up being just a couple of meetings. I guess, I mean, it was a kind of an extracurricular activity, and I was trying to have students meeting every week and deciding on the materials and deciding on how we would do it, and then move into the design process. But then they start having deadlines. So then you kind of like... they kind of fall away slowly. But then there were students who really got involved in the building of the project, which we'll see in a second. But also in this design, there were two key moments, and I think Macaulay came up with the idea of kind of having the two chairs coming from one sand, and then a miracle happened, and that miracle was called Tony McCourt. So Tony McCourt is a local retired, I hope he doesn't mind me saying that, even though he works more than I do, I'm sure about that. He doesn't seem to be retired to me, but he's a local carpenter. And then I'd got some money to make the project, not a huge amount, but I had to deliver it now. And I was really worried about how I deliver this. And I was looking at the opportunity. I was thinking about buying IKEA chairs and putting IKEA chairs in a circle or something like that, looking for a cheap option. But then Tony came along, and they opened the My Friendly Cities workshop, which is sadly moved now because they're redeveloping the art and design school. But Tony was instrumental in building these chairs, and here he is building. Together we built this first prototype. Yeah, Tony really hates me now, I think. Tony ended up building, or being the main person building.
How many prototypes did you make in terms of like design trials?
I wanted to make several prototypes. I wanted to make several prototypes, trying to get it right, and then I wanted to make a prototype in oak, which is the material we use. Then I wanted to make another, but Tony was saying, "No, we've made our prototype. It works. So
it's done.
It's done. It's over." So he was really instrumental in the process. And there was a time where we were working to a previous deadline, so not the Coventry Welcomes deadline that we had. And Tony just went wild in the workshop, building these chairs. I would have some students occasionally coming in to help with some elements of the job, and I would be there also. But Tony, I mean, yeah, what can I say, Tony? If you're watching, thank you.
The man with the chair. So
this is co-creation. And what was really nice here, you have the students, Aswad, Naveen, Dennis, or that's Cathy actually. Aswad, Cathy, and Dennis kind of working with Tony in the workshop, building. So this process of building is really important in terms of the experience for students, but also what I like to experience when I'm engaging with a project. Here you have some more. I'll just run through a couple of images from the workshop. Looked at developing the details, developing the columns. So here we have Sahana doing some oiling. I mean, these students that came on board with the project, who oiled the whole process and were putting together all these components, drilling all the holes. So it was a really great collective effort. Here you see.
And just to give an idea, how big was this? What was the scale of it?
So it's not huge. It's 5.5 meters in diameter and then 4.5 meters high. I mean, it was a bit ridiculous because the workshop was 4 meters high, I believe. But I wanted that extra 0.5 meter because I knew in the cathedral that whatever you put in that cathedral, it becomes small. You know,
it's a really dwarfing space, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. It's a big space. So I was in there saying, and you know, people were saying, well, you should just make it 4 meters high. Then we can construct it indoors before we construct it. And I was, no, we need that 0.5 meter. So sometimes you have to be insistent. So, but I was glad we did in the end. It meant we couldn't create the prototype inside, but yeah. And what was also really nice were the components that we developed with the engineering faculty in Coventry. So all the aluminium fixings are all bespoke for the project, and the adjustable feet, because we couldn't have any fixings in the cathedral. So basically you had to deal with all the undulations, and so you had to have, you couldn't drill, you couldn't have any invasive fixings. So that was something that was kind of difficult to deal with and to develop. But here we have some, just some of the production images. So you basically create a kit of parts that could be carried more or less by hand, even though we did have trucks, but everything had to be hand manageable. And then you have basically the prototype, not the prototype, the test build at the university, where we built a section of the project, and there you have it taking place in the cathedral itself. And then, after Tony came along, then Pete Berry came along, who was from Estates, and Estates helped me out hugely. Coventry University Estates helped me out hugely in the building of the project. And that's what it looked like on site.
It really was lovely. I was really, really pleased to be able to visit it. And I know, but it'd probably be useful to tell people who don't, the cathedral ruins structurally, obviously where to place it, any challenges that you came up against. I think that'd be quite an interesting point to bring up.
Yeah, it was basically, I had to submit, the weight. I had to talk to the structural engineer of the cathedral. So we had to calculate the weight of the project. But there are catacombs. As long as you're not engaging with, the catacombs, then it's quite a robust space. I'm just trying to play this because it was quite a nice building process. Oops, sorry about that. I'm just trying to maybe just play this. Let's see if it works. But basically you have the students, and then you have almost a medieval building process where you have these frame with sandbags, which you're using to stabilize the project. But these are all, it's a mixture of students here and also people from Estates, but basically a ladder and one small scaffolding, and you can build the project, which is really nice.
It looks great. I remember checking in on it during the build and keeping on coming back and peeking and taking more pictures.
Well, yeah, and the fantastic part was obviously you do all that work and all of that story, and then you see, okay, this is taking shape, and now let's see what happens, And what was really beautiful then was that I got the keys to the cathedral ruins. So I could open and close them as I wanted. And I was basically a resident in the cathedral ruins for a week. So that was my home. So I could really kind of occupy that space, which was a privilege, a great privilege. And I have to say thank you to the cathedral for that. That was really great. And what we had, so over the time we had there, this is an image at night. So this is kind of as it stands as a monolith. So the time in the cathedral was really special, because what you had waves and flows and different encounters and people occupying the space in different ways. And what it did was really enclose a space within the cathedral ruins, which is quite a big space, and it gave you somewhere to stop, somewhere to contemplate, because even though this is a space of remembrance, that moment of contemplation and has a certain, is aided when you have a certain scale, and this the internality of this space. And if you take away a chair and you create a window, it allowed you to contemplate that it framed a view which allowed you to contemplate that element, which sometimes would get lost in the whole kind of wonder or the spectrum of the cathedral ruins. So actually framing a view is really important sometimes. And also what you had was the sound installation from Synth Curious, which added another layer onto the experience. So when people came into this space and they were confronted by this object, which they didn't quite understand what it was. I mean, hardly anybody understood that there were chairs really until they, for a while. And then they were confronted also with these noises, this kind of this soundscape, which intrigued them. So there were two objects that they couldn't really, well, two experiences, which they couldn't really locate within their day-to-day experience. So that created this feeling of kind of intrigue and wonder and kind of inquiry, if you like. So this is basically, the chairs. This is the internal space. And here there's Tim Seeley there from Synth Curious. He occupied the space. He and Ian Campbell were also hanging out there a lot. So you would find people coming back again and again. And
I definitely spent a day there with my husband and my son, who at the time, I think he was 3. And he just thought it was amazing that he could just sit and be around and watch people within a space that he's used to running around in the ruins. So yeah, he thought it was great. Yeah,
the children is an interesting thing, because I didn't realize, or I hadn't thought about it, but the cathedral ruins is a place where lots of school kids come through, lots of classes. So at some point you'd be kind of just enjoying the quietness there, and then 40 kids would turn up. And I would kind of come over and they would be interested in this object. What is this? And then I would talk to them and I would say, well, the idea behind this is, the walls you see, they're made of chairs. So as people come together, they take down those chairs and the walls come down. And at the time, there was in the news, there was a lot of Donald Trump and his wall, and the kids got that. And the kids, because it's such a simple concept, this idea of the gathering of people and walls coming down, they really understood it and they loved it. So it kind of completely broke down any boundaries between kind of, if I started talking to them about Chandigarh beds and saying, okay, yeah, but what about, the working colonies of Chandigarh, where are they going to, they wouldn't understand it. But if you take that concept and then you express it in this idea of a democratic space, they really got it, which was really beautiful. And one of the kids actually said, "This is the most intelligent thing I've ever seen." I mean, which I think that was my moment of the
seal of approval.
Seal of approval. I wish I had recorded that one.
Yeah, because I think obviously we've mentioned briefly about Coventry Welcomes. We haven't really said about what it is. I know there's some images in here, but obviously Coventry Welcomes, we know, is part of the Refugee Week. And Coventry has its own arm, which is Coventry Welcomes, where it's all about all of the different cultures and diversity of the city. And it was really nice to see this space with the walls being able to come down and people sitting and celebrating all of those elements. So there was African drumming, the cathedral held a sermon there, although it absolutely chucked it down. There was no roof. So I think we were all there with umbrellas and supporting that.
Well, so I'm still looking for funding for a roof. I mean, that's... I think it was fitting within this space not to have a roof, because the cathedral doesn't have a roof. But I think there were, in terms of what happened during the week also, there were these kind of impromptu meetings. There's Ian Campbell and Tim Seeley again. There were these workshops, which were really quite intimate workshops. And having these intimate workshops within a public space was quite interesting, that they felt secure enough within a public space to have these intimate kind of performance exploration workshops. That was really nice. And then the drumming came, and then there were lots of impromptu meetings. So people would just come and sit and look, and then the next person would come and sit and look, and they would start chatting, and then groups would start to form, which was the whole idea of the space. So to actually watch it kind of coming into being was very nice. I'm an architect, so I always take photos without people, but I hope which is not really. So this was at night, which is really, it had a completely different atmosphere at night. But this is what you were talking about, the drumming sessions, where the whole thing kind of comes down and you have spectators all around, and dancing and music. And what was really nice about this is that, I mean, it is a big drum, right? There's no getting away from that. So you had people sitting inside a big drum, and really enjoying and celebrating the space. So it worked in for the intimate, quiet moment, and then also for those big celebrations. It kind of really, the walls came down, it folded out, and that's
it's beautiful
what was happening. So it was really, really great.
Yeah, and of course, like the cathedral itself is city centre located. So you've got lots of people walking past. It sits between the university and the shopping areas of Coventry city centre. So you've got this traffic coming through. Do you think having it there and at that time had an impact on the project? Like, for example, if you'd have taken it elsewhere, what do you think would have happened?
Well, that's really interesting, because what I would really like to do is take it somewhere. I mean, the cathedral ruins is a protected space. And even though, the concept was, the idea was this third chapel, the idea is now that it goes somewhere else. And, there are a couple of ideas of where it could go, but I'm kind of open for suggestions if everybody's willing to host it as well. But kind of into a real public space and to see what happens with it, into well, the cathedral ruins is a public space, but it's a locked public space at night, right? So it's not completely open. It has another layer of protection around it, which was really perfect for this first incarnation. But I'd really like to see it challenged in a way, or maybe activating a space which isn't used. So we've been thinking about putting it at the next Coventry Welcomes Festival, potentially under the railroad or something like that, which would be a natural roof for it first, but it could also activate a space. And I think that the spaces under bridges are also poignant spaces. Those are spaces which are often inhabited by homeless, for example, or they're also spaces where of freedom that aren't designed for necessarily for with any activity or program in mind. So they're spaces which attract a lot of edge or periphery kind of activities. So I think maybe putting something like this into a space like that and seeing what happens would be really, really interesting.
I mean, obviously we've got challenges with the current climate in terms of, well, there's a lot of challenges. You can pick one from a hat right now. But in terms of gatherings, like, what do you think, or how do you think this could work with social distancing restrictions, if any?
Okay. It works pretty well with social distancing restrictions, because you can put the chairs wherever you want, and it's better than a bench. But I think, the whole thing about social distancing and how we're experiencing space is really interesting. How we are kind of reconsidering space and more and aware of our bodies in space now. So the curation of ourselves as we walk down the street, and the curation of ourselves as we're really aware of the body of the other. And this is really interesting in terms of how, that awareness, how it might unfold and how it might make us kind of experience each other within public space. In this image here, this is one that I really enjoyed, because the layers of the ability to take a chair and making a window, there were often instances like that where there was a discussion going on inside between a group of people. They would develop a kind of a theme. And then the person who came to it didn't really want to be in the middle of all that, but wanted to participate. So the structure allowed from a distance to participate in those discussions. And I don't think, there weren't moments really where we were anywhere close to 2 meters next to each other. In the UK, we have quite a big kind of personal space anyway. It's a cultural thing as well. And in the UK, if you're within 2 meters, I'm already quite aware of you. So I don't, I don't know what your own personal radius is, but I think this idea of public space and distance, and when you were talking about your involvement with Coventry Modern as well, because the idea of modernism is also about the body and distance, or the distance from nature, the distance from each other, the distance from our bodily functions, the distance created from between people, and also the body in motion. So if you think about the car, and also and if you think back to Chandigarh, the town, the city that we looked at, and you think about zoning. So you're saying, okay, over here we're going to have a zone of the city that is specifically for this, and this is specifically for that. This kind of separation and the idea of distance and clarity is very much a modern one. And I think this project here was a way of kind of deconstructing that and getting back to kind of the body and the object and the person being able to curate space on their own. So I think we can curate this object as we want. I think it's perfect for
That's great. Well, in that case then, I mean, obviously you mentioned you're looking to take it somewhere, but so what, after you'd finished, what happened to it?
It's in storage. So it's still, it's sitting in storage, waiting for things to happen. Then obviously the lockdown happened, so it's not, so it's kind of difficult now. I'm trying to, looking for creating kind of opportunities and also reincarnations of it. I mean, what I would like to do is to create a new object, perhaps in a different country, in a different space, using local craftsmen, using their interpretation of the chair, because the chair is, very much a kind of at the forefront of cultural expression. How people create chairs, how they like to sit. One interesting thing about this is that all the chairs can all lie flat, which I found really interesting, and I haven't really explored this idea yet, but they become perfectly flat. So actually they become a carpet. So actually they could also become, used for in Islamic ceremony or some, so there's this kind of, this ambiguity within the object. So, and calling it a chapel of many was supposed to kind of reflect that it's a non-denominative space. But yeah.
I think we could probably do with that. Absolutely. And thank you, Sebastian. I mean, I've found it all really, really interesting, even though I know so much about it. In terms of visiting it while it was on and seeing some of the process of it being built. It's really nice to hear your thoughts and also about the bed. So I don't know if anybody's got any questions. It'd be great to hear from any viewers. Let's have a look here.
Here we have.
I'm just having a browse through, everyone, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if I mean, you've just mentioned the flooring. So your story made reference to unwanted settlements. This implies its temporary and marginalized nature. So what happened to it after, and what was its legacy?
Yes. Well, as I just mentioned, it's in storage, so its legacy is just a narrative in the ether at the moment. But I think, in terms of the way, when you think about the news at the moment and how kind of these monuments are being kind of engaged with and reevaluated, I think what this shows is there's another opportunity for an idea of a public monument that doesn't necessarily have a strong or a defined narrative apart from one of openness. So I would like to think that there is a potential for creating spaces that allow interaction, that allow co-creation, that allow us to take control of our public space and allow us to play. I think this is a big kind of idea behind all of this, is allow us to play within the public space. So at the moment, the legacy is an idea, I guess, but and it is the idea was that this was when it was conceived, this one was the kind of third chapel that would wander and become a satellite. But I guess, it would have to settle somewhere, and then maybe it would have a permanent legacy in a specific space. Yeah.
Interesting. In terms of a permanent space, what do you see working, or maybe even not working, while we're here?
With regards to this project?
Yeah.
So if this was a permanent space within a public space, you mean?
Mm.
Well, it would take a bit of maintenance, right? So which is not a bad thing. I think, the kind of engaging with the space in that sense also, and also, it might. It has this element of deconstruction, and this is something that planners really hate. They don't like anything that you can't control. So elements of this project might wander off. I remember Martin Green, artist from Coventry, having a discussion about this with him on the site, and he was really, encouraging me to allow, the chairs to wander off into, and I wouldn't have stopped them, I guess, if they had gone off, but they could have wandered out through the city and turned up in different places. And I think it just becomes a different project then. It can become, maybe they all find their way back at some point. There was another idea that it might collect stories if it does maintain this idea of a wandering structure, that it could collect stories on the way, and they somehow become embedded in the structure. So there are obvious difficulties potentially with it being a permanent installation in a very public space. But if you're not too precious about the object, then it will also tell a story over time. If after a year it's looking pretty dilapidated and half of it's missing, that tells a story also. It kind of, so I think that's fine in terms of time becoming a co-creator of the object as well, and other people.
Nice. I'm going to go to a question from Samantha Williams. So she said, it became a significant platform for activity during its residency at the cathedral. When you were initially exploring the idea, how did you imagine it being utilised?
I thought about it more or less. What I wanted to happen was that there was a spectrum of activities, and that's really what happened. So there were really kind of quiet activities. There was also, what was really important for me during that week was that there were moments of downtime, so that we would see just what evolved. So there had to be moments where the space just became a place and people encountered the project as it was. But then also to test it out against bigger gatherings and smaller gatherings and moments. And I think those all happened. And it's really nice what Sam said about it being a platform, because that's how I was talking about it always, that this is not, in itself, it's something, but actually it's a platform. It's a platform for people to come and do stuff, for kids to come and do stuff, for adults to come and do stuff, or just to experience as it was. So that range of activities we had was really quite nice within the...
Nice. Did you think that the activity happened fulfilled or surpassed any expectations?
I knew to a certain extent that, in my mind, people would be more willing to go engage, take the chair, maybe put the chair up. And there were some people, obviously, kind of like in this kind of scenario, you have people who are more courageous, and you have some people who are a bit more retiring. So it was interesting that you had to kind of learn the space and learn how to, even though I tried to make it as simple as possible, there was still a technique somehow to taking it off and putting it back on. It wasn't a very difficult technique, but I was always like, if somebody was having problem putting a chair back, I was like, oh no, this is terrible. But generally, that always happens. And actually that kind of, when somebody needs help to do something, that is also, that's also brings down a certain barrier, because somebody else will engage with that person. So having this potential barrier of asking somebody, can you take me down a chair, or can you put this up for me, or I'm having problems with this. So that became another way of kind of breaking down barriers. But you mentioned the rain. That was probably a difficult one. Like I was kind of like praying for nice days all the time. But so the kind of idea of a roof is something that could be explored within that, and I think we could make it work. But what I found really worked were the intimate gatherings. So when it was quite a closed space, actually, and it held you very nicely. And when you sat on the chair inside, there was a gap that you could see all the way around between the bottom chair and the second chair, which was kind of incidental. I hadn't planned that, but you could see you had a kind of a panoramic view. So whilst you were inside, you still had control of what was outside, so you weren't completely separated. So that was a happy coincidence that came out of having the object, which wasn't planned. Yeah,
that's really nice. And did you have stewards or people like talking about the helping?
Yeah.
Or were you there every day, or were there other people that?
I was generally there. I mean, obviously, I left it at the beginning. I was there constantly, but then I kind of got braver and left it, and then it lived for itself. During the events, there were stewards from Coventry Welcome, so they would help, kind of setting up if you had to set up something, or putting down, or just explaining, talking to people, which was really nice. So there was an element of kind of explanation at times that people wanted, you know, to kind of understand what this is all about. There wasn't a plaque, and there wasn't really any, and it's something I could consider to tell a kind of a bit of a story about it. But I think, I mean, the concept is so simple that you can say it in 2 sentences. So that idea, the accessibility of the project was quite positive. Yeah.
That's really good. I think we might have time for one more question.
Let's see.
Let's see. I've got one here. Diane. Hi. Diane said she loves the idea of a nomadic chapel. Maybe Towns and Tissies could request it to enable open conversations, activity and projects in public space. How do you see that working, Sebastian?
Management, is it? Management issue. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm open for requests, but I guess creating a platform for it to a certain extent. There isn't really a platform for it at the moment. So, you know, I would like to kind of engage it in a couple of different spaces, and it would be beautiful if somebody came and requested it, but tends to be the other way around, that you kind of chase opportunities. But this is a nice platform. Maybe something will happen here. But yeah, I think this is a really interesting idea. I mean, the idea of it becoming permanent somewhere is also great, and then building another one in a different with a different idea somewhere else. But I think it's something that's replicable. So the idea is kind of very straightforward, and it's also pretty functional. I mean, you get 2 or 3 spaces for one, right? So you get a quiet space, you get an event space. So actually it kind of ticks a lot of boxes in terms of in a pragmatic sense. So yeah, I think kind of selling it as a kind of a pragmatic kind of enabler is also a really good idea.
Maybe that's what everybody needs, a pragmatic enabler. Well, we are pretty much coming to the end. Obviously, there are so many more conversations in this series running right through to July. So everybody, please do check on the Arts and Place website. I'm Cara Pickering, and you're Sebastian Hicks.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for watching.